Have you ever wondered what was the big deal with Adam and Eve in the Bible? I mean, was it really so terrible to have a bite of an apple? I mean, I don't know. It seems like God is being completely unreasonable, banishing them from the garden forever over a first-time offense. And what is so terrible about eating a fruit that's on a tree, right? It's not hurting anybody, right? The apple's not racist. I didn't steal it from a starving family or whatever. And I know the answer. People will say, well, it's because God told them not to. That's what was so bad. God told them not to, and they didn't listen to God. Do you have any idea how many times I tell my children to do something that they don't do? Right? Like if I took this method, the Garden of Eden method, if I took that home with me when I finish up at work, right? I get home a little after 5 o'clock and I get home, I bet I could get all 4 kids banished by dinner. You know? Like that's the way. We know it's not about the fruit. We don't even know for sure it was an apple. We don't know what kind of fruit it was. And that's not the point. And I think the obedience piece is key. But even that, it just doesn't feel quite, it still feels like not following that rule wasn't what was the big deal. So what was the big deal with Adam and Eve in the Bible? Why did they get in so much trouble when they chose to disobey and eat a forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden? You see, the rebellion in the garden, the original sin, it was actually idolatry. Now, if you don't know, idolatry is where you take a thing that is not God and you try to make it God, right? We pretend that it's God. God said, don't eat the fruit on this tree, but it's not about the fruit on the tree. God was saying, choose me. Choose my instruction. Choose my guidance. Choose what I told you is best because I love you and I want what is best for you. But Eve, and then later her buddy Adam, chose themselves. God said, let me be the one to make the rules. You be the created people, I'll be the creator, right? But I will guide you. But they chose to make their own rules, to follow their own heart, to replace God with themselves. The rebellion of Eden is not eating a fruit. It's trying to be God. And from that moment, humanity has come up with more and more clever ways of trying to be our own God. Now, today is part 3 in our sermon series called With. And we've been working through this brilliant book by a guy named Skye Jethani called With, and it's by the same name. And every week, we've been reviewing different ways that Christians try to approach God, and we go over the weaknesses. And the goal at the end of the day, our goal is to live life with God. So today, we're going to look at the life from God posture. Now, to understand life from God, we need to look at our consumer culture. And then to understand that, we got to talk about advertisements. Going all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, humanity suddenly became incredibly productive. We were spitting out stuff at a rate nobody could keep up with. We created so many products that suddenly manufacturers had to create a way to increase the demand. And advertising was born. The way Skye puts it, he says, ads became the prophets of capitalism, turning the hearts of the people to the goods they didn't know they needed. Fast forward into today. In today's society, there are studies that say that we are exposed to roughly 3,500 desire-inducing advertisements every single day. We have been taught by consumer culture that our lives is nothing more than a series of unmet needs. I have a need right now, and I'm going to have another need tomorrow. I didn't even know that I needed that. And it says that we can appease the discontent in our heart with commodified goods and super fun experiences. Think about it this way. If we as a people began suppressing our desires, if we as a culture just started only buying what we actually need, our entire economy would collapse. Right? It would be horrible if satisfying personal desires has become a sacred value in our culture. Here's an example of this that I thought was really surprising. Back in World War II, right after Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt got on the television and he asked the citizens of the country to ration the goods that were needed for the war effort. During World War II, during that conflict, sacrifice was the core value of America, right? Instead of consumption. But if you fast forward to September 11th, 2001, after that attack, the response was completely different. They told us if we stop buying, or if we stop traveling, or if we stop consuming whatever materialistic life you want, then you are letting the terrorists win. Did you hear stuff like that back then, right? It was like, oh, no, if you stop living your life, then you're letting them win, because consuming became a core value in America. And it didn't always used to be that way. The modern world is not primarily driven by ancient superstition or even natural science like we talked about last week. Our modern world is driven by the economics of constant consumption. I think it was Madonna who said it best. We live in a material world, and we are material girls. And all of that changes how we approach God, right? When you do a survey in the modern world of how people understand God, most people look at God as if he was a combination of a divine butler and a cosmic therapist. The two most common prayers that we have are, God, help me feel better, and God, give me this thing I want. As we see God as, in Skye's words, a holy vending machine who dispenses the wares and the wisdoms we desire. Life from God is a posture that believes that the whole point of God, he's out there to supply what we want. The whole point of God was to take care of me. In that kind of consumer relationship, it's not God we love. It's his gifts that we like. In a consumer worldview, God's value is determined by his usefulness. Religion becomes nothing more than a spiritual method of achieving our desires. And to be honest, a lot of people love that because it doesn't ask us to change. What we want, what we desire, what we seek, what we do, how we live, none of that has to change. None of it has to be disrupted. Life from God is modern consumerism with a Jesus sticker slapped on the bumper. Now, this is tricky. All along in this sermon series, what we've seen is that we approach God in good ways. All these ways have a little bit of merit to it. I mean, if you think about it, yes, God is our provider. That's what the Bible says. And God actually invites us to ask him for things. He says, yes, ask me. I'm a good father. I love to give to my children and take care of them. But if we love God's gifts more than we love God himself, we have lost the plot somewhere. With life from God, God has no inherent value. His value comes from how useful he is to us. I think a good example is the grandparents at Christmas, like I was talking about with the kids earlier. Parents and grandparents, we love giving gifts to our kids, don't we? I mean, it's the best. When you give a gift to your kid and watch their little eyeballs like pop out of their head when they see the wrapping paper and they just tear at it and they reveal this gift. It's wonderful to give gifts. It's actually a divine feeling, right? Because God loves doing that for us. And that's why we love doing it for our children. Grandparents get a taste of what God experiences when they give gifts to their grandkids. It feels so wonderful. But there's always that moment, right? Before the kid rips into the paper where we're trying to slow them down, get them to read the tag. We ask them, we're like, who is it from? Because the truth is, kids don't care, right? They do not care who the gift is from. They are so excited. That's why we have to teach it to them. We got to slow them down and try and connect the gift and the giver so they can appreciate the relationship. We make them slow down. We say, no, read the card. See that this thing comes from this person who loves you, right? And after they've opened the gift, we try to get them to walk over there. Okay, now go over to grandma and say thank you for the thing that they just gave you. As parents and grandparents, we want to instill gratitude, and we want to connect the gift and the giver, because otherwise our children will value the gift more than the relationship. Right? And we know that that's not right, because the truth is grandma is more valuable than a Lego set, right? But that's not the way the culture is teaching it to them. But that's a hard lesson for kids to learn in a consumer culture. And I know we make jokes about it, right? That kids can be so laser focused on something, but it's a more relevant A more relevant example would be apple orchards. My family has a tradition where every year we gather with our extended family and we go out and pick apples. We did it just this past weekend. And we go, it's a whole event and it's awesome. We go, we pick out a giant pile of apples. The boys go nuts on the playground at the apple orchard for a little while. And then the adults get some hot apple cider and we watch the kids. And then we end it with a big pile of donuts. Did you know they make pumpkin donuts? It's awesome. They're amazing, right? It's like the perfect day. And we, the adults, we know that the whole point of this day is to spend time together as a family with cousins and aunts and uncles and grandma and grandpa, and everybody's hanging out together. But if you ask my children, what is the point of that day? It's the donuts, right? That's why they are here. Duh, right? And don't get me wrong, I love the donuts. That's my favorite part too. But if we've lost the plot, if we settle for loving the gift and not treasuring the giver. God is our provider, and that's true, and that's beautiful. But God himself is the treasure. All throughout this series, we've been talking about this cycle of fear and control that happens, right? There's danger in the world, and that leads us to be afraid. And when we are afraid, we start grabbing for control. That's the way we cope with it. Most of the time, we respond to danger. We are afraid. We grab for control. We try to find methods and tips and tricks to figure out the world, to regain control and not be so afraid anymore when there's change coming. But with a life from God, we're not grabbing for control. We're grabbing for distractions, right? That's how it works. According to a man named Neil Postman, he wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. He says that the word amusement literally means to not think. Did you know that? The word amusement means to not think. Rather than removing pain or fear like those other methods we've talked about so far, consumerism is designed to distract us from it. God, even the church sometimes, exists to distract people from their problems. Skye writes, but distraction is not the same as deliverance. Consumerism and life from God, it might numb our fears and our pains, but it does not remove them. This is what we see in our scripture lesson for today, with the first half of the prodigal son story. Now, it's a classic tale, right? I'm sure you've heard it before. The first half of the story, the younger son wakes up one day, and he looks at his father and he says, Dad, I wish you were dead. I want your inheritance. I want my inheritance right now. And then he takes all that money and he blows it on this lavish lifestyle, doing whatever he wants. He tells his dad, I wish you were dead because I want your money. And we have a word for that in the modern world. He's a jerk, right? Right? There's probably some more colorful language that we could use, but this is a family-friendly worship service, right? But I mean the audacity of a son coming to his father, the sheer selfishness of looking at the provider of your entire life and saying, I just want the money. I value that more than I value our relationship. I mean, this is the perfect example of that life from God, valuing the gifts rather than God himself. This mentality of the prodigal son, it's still around in the modern world. Jean Twenge is this psychologist from San Diego State University. She analyzed the mental health records of people from 1938 all the way up to 2007, more than 63,000 young adults. And this is a quote from their findings from this study they did. The researchers found that students today feel more isolated, misunderstood, and emotionally sensitive and unstable than in previous decades. In addition, the teens today are more likely to be narcissistic, have poor self-control, to say that they are worried and sad and dissatisfied with their lives. Twenge concluded, he said, we have become a culture that focuses more on material things and less on relationships. I'm not waxing eloquent about biblical principles from thousands of years ago. This is quantifiable scientific data from the real world today. A life from God mentality where we value gifts over relationships is destroying our mental health. Skye writes, he says, so much of contemporary religion is focused on God's gifts rather than on God. We use God as a means of building or repairing our families. We use him as a sex therapist, as our political advisor, as our financial planner. We use God. From God's hand, we seek family, sex, power, and wealth. But do we actually want God himself? The good news for us today is that God's love is unconsumable. And I keep making up words every week, but God's love is not a consumer good that can be used and then thrown away. God's love is eternal and steadfast and overflowing. God's love cannot be consumed or used. God's love is unconsumable because God is the treasure. God created you, and he walks with you in this life. God is around you all the time, wrapping you in his presence, knowing God and being known by God. That is the greatest treasure this life has to offer. The all-powerful creator of the universe, the maker of the heavens and the earth, he loves you. He comes close to you. He sits with you in your moments of pain and your heartbreak. He celebrates and cheers with you in your moments of triumph and joy. To be in his presence is awe-inspiring. And when you can grab onto that realization of how incredible it is that you get to be in God's presence, it will change your spiritual life forever. Like when you pray, if you think about it, the one who knit together every molecule of your body, he holds you together with the laws of his crazy universe that he created. That one turns to you and pays attention to what you say. In all his infinite glory and in all his incredible power, he pours out his presence and his love on you. And that realization, it's more than we can handle. God's love cannot be consumed. Henry Nouwen puts it like this. He says, why is it so important that you are with God and God alone? It's important because this is the place in which you can listen to the voice of the one who calls you beloved. To pray means to listen to the one who calls you my beloved daughter, to the one who says, my beloved son, my beloved child. To pray is to let that voice speak to the center of your being, to your guts, and let that voice resound in your whole being. The key to living life with God, it's actually really simple. We need to treasure God and not just his gifts. What we need to work on in our spiritual walk is making God the focus, making God the treasure that we seek. So there's actually 2 steps to this. First, we need to learn more about God. Before you can really desire him, before you can really make him your treasure, you got to have a clear picture about who and what God is. In the book, Skye tells a story about his 6-year-old who has a sugar addiction. As a father, I can relate to this sugar addiction. And one time he tells this story about how he took his son to a minor league baseball game. And they're in the big stands in the big concrete stadium. And some powdered sugar from a funnel cake had fallen on the ground. Anybody want to guess where this is going? The 6-year-old, he was a few years younger. He was 4 years old. He got down on his hands and knees and licked the powdered sugar off the concrete floor. His mother had a heart attack. And this kid loves sugar, right? We know he loves sugar. He knows what's good. He knows that sugar is good. But if you were to offer that same kid creme brulee, he'd probably turn it down because he doesn't know what it is. If you don't know what creme brulee is, you'd probably be like, what is that, a French vegetable? No, sounds sneaky. I don't want that. But if you were to phrase it differently, if you were to explain to the child what you were offering, no, buddy, would you like some vanilla pudding with sugar sprinkled on top, and then I'm going to hand you a blowtorch? I mean, what 6-year-old would say no to that, right? You get to caramelize the sugar on top with a blowtorch? There's no sweet-toothed 6-year-old who would not be stoked to get some of that. See, for a lot of people, when we think about God, we have an incomplete or a flawed picture of God. We see God, if you see him just as like a gift giver, like a divine Santa Claus, that's not enough to get you excited about God, to get you to be excited about his presence. But if our vision of God is enlarged and corrected, Skye writes, if we could see his unrivaled beauty, if we could grasp his unconditional love, if we could perceive his radiant glory and experience his untainted goodness, then it would become obvious that he is so much more than a deity to tolerate or a device to employ. To truly make God your treasure, you have to learn more about how good and infinite and perfect and awesome God is. You might be imagining powdered sugar on the concrete floor, but God is actually more like creme brulee. A lot of us just didn't know what it meant. So the first step you got to learn about God is if you're going to treasure him. The second step is something that I'm calling the ha-ha cycle. There is a pattern that grows out of quiet time with God. In the book, Skye, he credits a guy named Jerome Berryman who studied children and how they learn about God, their spiritual development. But it works for adults too. The ha-ha cycle goes like this. I think we've actually got a picture of it. It starts with silence, and then you move to and then aha, and then ha-ha. I know that was super obvious and clear, so let's walk through it. You start with silence. Give yourself quiet time every single day. Like put away the phone, turn off the TV, just sit and focus on God's presence. In my life, the last couple of weeks, my tradition I used to do is I'd wake up and I'd turn the TV on, I get my coffee, and I'm all groggy, and I sit there drinking my coffee, scrolling on my phone with the TV on in the background. That was like my morning way of waking up. But a couple weeks ago, my wife and I, we gave ourselves a goal. We said, what if we don't turn on the TV? Right? With no screens in the morning. We're just going to do this without. And so we spent time in quiet with God. Silence is incredibly powerful, and it moves you into the phase. Now, the first phase is a sense of wonder and awe. It's almost like a sigh. It's like, you start with silence. And if you sit there and reflect on God, it will lead you to an The next is then as our minds are, is where we realize that God is awesome and overwhelming and nourishing and incredible. The sigh, the wonder. Then as our minds are able to catch up to the experience that came out of the silent, the second phase is the aha. That exclamation is discovery. That's where we see something about God. We learn something about God. We realize something about God. And that discovery, silence leads us to wonder, which leads us to discovery. And then the final step is that discovery leads us to joy. We exclaim, and that's the exclamation of like, ha ha! It's our discovery of who God is. When you let it sink in, when you discover something good about Jesus and about God and how much he loves you, when you discover that, it leads you to incredible joy. It's like finding out you won the lottery, but even better. When the Creator of God is your treasure, it will move you to joy. Our dreary and frightening vision of the world is replaced with a joy beyond understanding. And then that joy will lead us back to a place of silence, almost like anticipation, where we are eagerly waiting the next discovery of God. Silence, wonder, discovery, and then joy. It's way better and way healthier than the cycle of danger, fear, and control that we used to use to try and make ourselves feel good. Here's the thing. If you spend time in your life intentionally making God your treasure, you become bulletproof. Your circumstances cannot take away your hope. Your fear cannot take away your security. No amount of consumer distractions could ever pull your gaze away from the thing that you love the most. When God is your treasure, no matter what else happens in life, you are good. You're set. With Adam and Eve in the garden, we saw that the fruit was good, like powdered sugar on the concrete. But they didn't treasure their relationship with God at all, even though it was so much more valuable than the fruit. Instead of choosing God, they chose themselves. And ever since that moment, God has never stopped reaching after his people. God's love is unconsumable. It's not a distraction from the pain of the world. It is a solution to the pain of the world. God is the greatest treasure you could ever imagine, and he is the only thing that you truly need to heal what is broken inside each of us. So I'll leave you with this. May you remember the value of the gift giver and above the value of the gifts. May you treasure God with silence and wonder and discovery and joy. And finally, may you live your life with God. Amen.